We are recording the session, so if you don't want to be on the record, just don't say anything. We do post our videos afterwards on YouTube, so if you ever want to go back and check what we've presented before or different speakers that we've had, you're more than welcome to do so. And we have a shortcut to our YouTube channel on the screen. So my name is Dimitri. I'm one of the organizers here. With me is Mike Dixon, Dave Losey, and Jeff Rowski could not be here with us today. We all work in the space covering different angles of Office 365. So if you have any questions, feel free to come talk to us. We're more than happy to help. So last time, for those that were able to join us on Boylston Street in Boston, we had Dave Pileggi giving us the lowdown on the difference between Skype for Business broadcast versus Teams broadcast. I personally found it to be a great session because I've never had a chance to play with those tools. If you have a chance, check out YouTube. It's a great session to catch up on. So at this point in the meeting, we'd like to cover some of the new announcements that have been made since the last time that we've met. Of course, there's a ton of announcements out there. We can cover a short portion in the 5 minutes we have here, but we want to dive through it. As many of you know, there was the SharePoint conference in North America recently, and Marc's here to really fill us in on what's been talked about and announced at the conference. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the SharePoint side of things. I want to cover a little bit more of the other areas. But just to very lightly touch upon it, the new Yammer Conversations web part is now available. This takes your very basic comment section that you have at the bottom of your news components, really puts it on steroids and gives you more of a rich discussions experience that we're used to with Yammer. There's a new concept of a SharePoint home site that was announced that really is a hub site that's based on the communications template that's really on steroids. I'm sure Marc's going to cover that a little bit later on today. There's a new announcement around Microsoft Search. So we've heard about Microsoft Search as it tied into Bing for Business Search at Ignite last year. And Microsoft has really expanded upon this to branch into Office 365, to branch into OneDrive, into SharePoint. Some of you that are on fresh release tenants might see a new search box appear front and center on your team sites. That's now the new Microsoft Search experience. And besides the different experiences that are being offered to end users, there's also a new admin panel behind the scenes called the Search Center Admin Center. So this will give you a little bit more insights in terms of what people in your organization are looking for. It'll give you a lot of other great analytics for you to really learn what's working well and what needs some improvement.
Quick question. Would anybody be interested in a topic, a session about Microsoft Search?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
So a few updates with Microsoft Teams in recent history. Now, if you're using Teams within Chrome, you can share your screen, which is awesome if you're working with those that don't have Teams installed, maybe outside your organization. So great addition there. There's a new feature where you can find an empty Teams-enabled meeting nearby. So for those companies that have rolled out Teams conference rooms, where you invite the conference room and you can click join on the Creston or Polygon terminal. Now you can actually, in a pinch, pull up the rooms that are available based on the Team's availability, and it'll guide you what room you can use. Another great feature is that you can now manage membership of your Teams directly out of your mobile apps. So you can add people, remove people, and so forth, promote people to owners. So it's great as we move away from PCs, more to our phones. And then we're also getting some new notifications on our phones when meetings are starting to give us a one-tap experience to get into the meeting, which is always nice compared to going to the Outlook app, clicking on the calendar item, clicking the join button. That's pretty cool. There's a lot more updates on these two links. Of course, we do publish these decks to our website at the end of every session, so definitely take a look if you're interested. There's also some recent updates with Microsoft Forms. We had some interest about this last few sessions. So there's a new feature now where you can have multiple sections or multiple pages of questions. So if you are submitting surveys in the free version, you have a lot more options. There's now new integration options with Microsoft Stream. So you can now have polls and surveys and so forth embedded in some of those areas around Stream videos to make it a little bit more engaging with your end users. There's also a new utility where you can transfer ownership of a form. So if you have a form that somebody created and they left your organization, you can now take ownership of that, which, beforehand you'd be in a pretty tough spot. And lastly, Microsoft Forms Pro is now generally available. It's going to be, it's becoming generally available next week on July 1st. This is more of the paid version of Microsoft Forms that adds a lot more analytics. There was some interest about having a session on this pro version of Forms that we definitely have on our radar. But in the meantime, you can go check it out. There's a free 30-day trial that you can register for. And even after the trial expires, they really charge based on how many different survey responses you get. So for dev purposes, it should be fairly low cost, even if we're just playing around.
So is that something you buy the tenant as opposed to by the person? You don't have to individually license?
Great question. So I haven't seen a whole lot of information about exactly how you could license it. But one thing I can tell you is that this is also designed to be outside your organization. So if you wanted to measure like customer engagement surveys, you can now leverage this product to really kind of act more like a survey monkey where it has a broader reach, but you still have the analytics and control behind the scenes. Planner. So some recent updates in recent history. So now there's a lot more accessibility documentation that has been added for Planner, specifically so that screen readers can do a better job at figuring out what bucket you're in, what tasks are assigned, and all of the metadata that's assigned to those tasks. If you're using Planner on your mobile phone, you can now invite guests, which is pretty big. In the past, you had to be an authenticated user, joined to that group to have access to a Planner. Now you have a little bit more flexibility. There's the ability to have multiple plans per group, which is pretty cool. And the new feature that I'm really excited about is the ability to copy plans to duplicate them. So if you have a certain set of recurring events, you can create like a template planner, and then every time you spin up an event, you just copy that template with all of your buckets and tasks and so forth pre-configured into a new area. And last but not least, there are new notifications coming directly into Microsoft Teams when you have a task assigned to you. So it's really kind of employing that better integration so you have one place to work in Teams and the ability to see what's happening with all the services around it. A few of these items we have discussed in past sessions, but this is kind of a quick recap. There's a new feature for OneDrive that I think many of us have been asking for, and this is the ability to have SharePoint libraries auto sync to your end users' machines. And when I say sync, I mean make it available with the files on demand feature. So for many organizations that migrate from file shares into the cloud, they will really want to have a better experience for users besides going to a browser, finding what they need and clicking the sync button. A lot of times organizations would just prefer that their same department share that they had on their P drive or Z drive is now just showing up in their Windows Explorer just like the file share would. So with this feature, you can now enable this, which is pretty cool. I think this is going to solve a lot of my clients' problems. So that being said, there's a lot of other announcements on OneDrive in the last 30 days. Marc's probably going to touch on some of them during his session today, but a few things that I found to be pretty cool is that there's a new experience if you wanted to scan a receipt or scan a document using your phone. The OneDrive mobile apps now have a new scan button that make things a lot easier to kind of scan and stitch together. There's new functionality where if you have your iPhone or your Android, you can have all of your photos automatically sync into your OneDrive. So that way you can free up space on your device while still backing everything up into the cloud. You're able to send out anonymous links with password protection to them. So you no longer have to put a password on your Word file. If you're going to share an anonymous link, you can actually put that whole contents of the link behind a password, which is nice if you're looking to share things broadly but keep them somewhat secure. There's a new ability to block downloads. So people could open it within the context of the browser, but they can't download it to their machine. This was a feature that Box and Dropbox have had for some time. Clients have been asking Microsoft. Microsoft has delivered. There's some new reports coming out. There's some new customizations around the emails that get sent out to your external parties when you're being invited to come collaborate on a document. You can now put your company logo on it and make it look a little bit more personalized, a little bit less like those spoofing emails that we've all received over time. There's also a new bookmark feature where if you're browsing through files and you want to come back to them, you can click the bookmark button, and it's kind of like a save for later feature where later you can go and see everything you've bookmarked. So for those that deal with massive file structures, this is really helpful to favorite your favorite ones, keep it in the browser so it works cross-platform as opposed to your browser shortcuts that are just in your browser. And the last part I want to bring is that there's a new feature. So previously, if you had Office files and you made a save to a file, it would just take your changes and sync that up to the cloud. And that worked great for Office files. It really reduced how much network traffic you had to send back and forth for every small change. They've now extended that functionality to work against a lot more file types, including JPEGs and PDFs and other binary files. So they figured out a way to figure out what's changed and just send that differential across. Pretty cool stuff. I'm not quite sure how it works, but we've seen the demos. It's been pretty cool. Elves. Okay, so huge thanks to the Garage for being our venue sponsor and offering to host us here. Let's give them a round of applause. Huge thanks to Trend Digital for being our platinum sponsor. They're able to supply us with the food to these events, as well as also our administrative overhead costs for Meetup and MailChimp and all the other fun stuff that comes in with running an organization. We are a 501c3, so we're fully legit, which comes with some overhead and paperwork, but we're able to stay afloat. So, that being said, I don't want to delay this any further, so I'm going to turn it over to Marc Anderson, who has generously volunteered to come and tell us all of the great things that have happened at the SharePoint conference last month.
Everything.
4 days in the next 60 to 70 minutes.
Really fast. Okay, so was anyone at the SharePoint conference? So you saw the big demo with Tesla and like SharePoint powered Tesla cars now. Ford and Mercedes are coming next. Did you see that demo? Oh, you guys didn't see those demos where all the cars are now going to be SharePoint powered?
So basically, I should get a bike something like.
Okay, I made that up. But you weren't sure, were you? I mean, it could happen, right? So, yeah, well, I thought no one was going to have said they were there, so I didn't have to lie to you. But okay, so you know, they covered oodles and oodles of things at the conference. I didn't go to all the sessions. I don't know everything that happened, obviously, but I've got some slides from Dan Holm that are the sort of high-level view. Did anyone watch the keynote? Okay, cool, that's good. So there may be some repetition here, but you know, what I'd really like to do is discuss this, right? So rather than me just reading you what's on the slides, that's no fun. So you know, if you have questions about what they said and what they meant and things like that, I'd rather have it be that kind of conversation. And then the roadmap slides, Sue Hanley had grabbed all the screenshots of those, but Microsoft actually just released a deck of all the roadmap slides yesterday, I think, or maybe the day before. So I have those as well. So we can go through the roadmap slides and stop wherever you guys have interest and talk through what some of the things are on those on the roadmap slides. And I can tell you what I think is happening and when it's going to happen and things like that. Okay? And I'll be wrong about some things and you guys will correct me, which is good because we're all trying to learn from each other. And I certainly do not have all the answers. I am not Dan Holm. These are his slides. So I think that the big theme for this year was the intelligent intranet. They always have some big theme that we haven't seen before, and that was the one. And Microsoft 365 being mentioned a lot more than we heard Office 365. So my gut tells me that the Office 365 brand is going to sort of be sort of fade away a little bit, and Microsoft 365 as a much more larger, more overarching brand is going to become more visible, and then that certainly was in evidence on all the signage and all the things like that. So it's really tying everything together. Of course, they want everyone to think that this is very simple. It's accessible to everybody. Underneath everything is security, so no matter who's worried about whatever security standard or you know, regulatory standard or whatever, they've got it covered. That always tends to be the last thing they talk about after they do the really cool demos, but it's very important to them to get across the idea that everything is very secure and managed well. I think we're seeing also in the improvements to all the admin centers that I don't know how many of you guys spend time in the admin centers, but you probably are seeing that it's feeling like there's more control there or more information at least. Let me take the control part away. More information to make better decisions, which is really the key. Because if you're an administrator of part of the services in Microsoft 365, see, I'm going to start doing it too. In Microsoft 365, you need to know what's going on so that you can make the right decisions, as opposed to and be proactive if you can be, as opposed to trying to react to something that you hear somebody talking about in the hallway. You ought to be ahead of them because you've got the data coming at you. So, there have been many rumors about SharePoint's demise. How many times has SharePoint been dead? It hasn't been dead as many times or as well as InfoPath, but it's been dead. But it's never been dead, right? SharePoint is still at the core of a lot of what certainly Office 365 is, and increasingly what Microsoft 365 will be. It may, I don't know if the brand SharePoint will last as long as I do working. I may retire before it disappears, or drop over having enjoyed a full life as a SharePoint consultant. But whether or not the brand SharePoint is there, the pieces of SharePoint that actually provide us great functionality are going nowhere. Every one of these services that bolt together as part of Microsoft 365 are tending to store something about themselves in SharePoint. There are ways to access files and a lot of list content from other services in the SharePoint UI, and then there are a lot of other services where you're touching SharePoint whether or not you know it. Teams is a great example of that. I've worked with some organizations where they use Teams and only Teams, and you say, well, how do you like SharePoint? And they say, oh, we don't use SharePoint. We don't even have that turned on. It's like, yeah, maybe you do. All those files that you're putting in there are going in there. So SharePoint is increasingly, well, I think it's as important as it has ever been. It's increasingly more important to the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, and it still has a lot of legs as itself. Modern SharePoint is becoming almost like a new product compared to what we've had in the past. So files, news, lists, pages, apps, spaces, all of those. And yes, some people are laughing about spaces, but it's actually getting a lot of traction in some markets, some verticals. Yeah?
I was going to laugh about spaces.
Were you?
You covered it.
I think that the first demos were actually really bad, and that was to their detriment, right? When you see some of the demos now where you see people using them in manufacturing, or trying to do virtual surgery or things like that, where spaces are a way to access immersive environments, it's actually really cool, and you can see the use cases. The stupid thing with the little balls on the stands that they showed last year was like, yeah, we don't really need one of those, right? So I think Spaces will come on its own. They did not talk about Spaces a lot. Did you go to a Spaces session? I don't even know if they probably did have sessions, but it wasn't the thing that they talked about in the keynote. Yeah. I think they're making a lot of progress there, and they're seeing a lot of really good use cases, and they're focusing on those as opposed to trying to get everyone to believe that it's the greatest thing coming. Oh yeah, Yammer and Stream, they're still part of all this too. Yammer just started, just in the last few weeks, I think, started storing their files in SharePoint. So again, we're seeing more of the content focusing in on the SharePoint storage. I'm skipping stuff that doesn't really have that doesn't really show you anything of use. So share, if you think about what an intranet is, if you're building an intranet for your organization, you're going to think about SharePoint as one of the possible tools. You could use lots of different stuff, but if you've bought into the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, you're going to want to put your intranet on SharePoint. How many of you are using modern SharePoint exclusively now? Some? Yeah. I mean, it's, a year ago that would have been probably half the number of people at most, and I think that's really accelerated a lot. And I think that people are starting to see that the ease of building something that's intranet-like in modern SharePoint is just leaps and bounds past what classic SharePoint could do. It's a lot less work, even though I think a lot of clients that I've talked to still make it into a lot of work because of and the hard part is the content, which is actually what we want. You know, it's not the technology that's hard with modern SharePoint, it's the content that's hard, which is what it should be. That's the part that's unique to that organization. So we have SharePoint News that's great for rolling up information from different sites, depending on, you know, whether they're part of the same hub site or just, you know, sites that you want to roll up in a news web part. Now you can choose individual sites that you want to roll up news from. You can choose to roll up stuff from a specific hub or hubs. You can choose to roll up stuff from the entire tenant. So you've got a lot of choices there, and news really then becomes something that is a good way to bring some consistency to what people hear, but it's also permission trimmed. So if people don't have access to certain sites within any of that sort of infrastructure, they're seeing news that's relevant to them as opposed to news that they're not supposed to see. So that's pretty cool. And you know, that's the way SharePoint's always worked, but it's with modern SharePoint, it's a new learning experience with that permissions actually still work and everything. Communication sites seem to have gotten a lot of traction. How many are using communication sites? Yeah, so when you're building an intranet, that's your department site, that's your location site, that's your product site. You know, the place to showcase content that is important to your organization, where you want to push content out from a small number of people to a large number of people. Hubs allow you to, hub sites are sort of the new site collections in a sense, right? We have modern sites which are not, underneath are site collections, except that they're not collections of sites. Hubs are collections of sites, so we can associate sites, associate modern sites or classic sites, but more often we're doing it with modern sites, with hub sites, and that starts to tie those sites together. And that gives you some consistency in the branding. It can give you some consistency with the information architecture, because when you associate a site with a hub, you can set it up so that a site design is applied to that site. Anyone worked with site designs? It's actually, I think it's going to be really cool. Instead of the old way we used to do things with templates, you know, we'd save site as template, and we'd get this weird file that we'd have to move around and instantiate. Now instead, we'll start with a team site or a communications site and apply a site design to it that builds stuff on top of it. And that stuff on top of it will be what makes our sites into what we want them to be. So for instance, if we have a department site and we want all departments to have three document libraries and a couple of content types applied to them, and maybe some permissions set and the logo set, then we can do that with a site design. And site scripts and site designs go together. Site designs or site scripts are sort of the pieces. Like, I want to create a new content type, I want to create a new library, I want to create a new set of permissions, and then the site design sort of ties all that together into something that you apply either automatically, like I said, when a site is associated with a hub, or on demand, sort of. If you're a site owner, you can actually apply a site design. They're supposed to be idempotent. Bob German taught me that word. I love that word. Or idempotent. And what that means is that no matter how many times you run that site design on a site, it should always leave the site in the same state. So if you say, I want to add a list in a site design, well, it's not going to add it every time you run the thing. It's going to say, oh, that's already there, so I'm not going to do this again. So you can iterate on your site designs and roll out improvements to those templates, if you will, and improve what you've got in a set of sites as you go along. Home sites are the new thing, and I think there are a couple slides about them here. But if you think about, you know, the root site of a site collection has always been what we've thought of as the home site in a sense for Classic, right? We've all sort of wanted that shortest URL to land at, and then we got stuck for a while because that site was locked in Classic. So if you think about these new home sites being sort of the replacement for that, in a sense, but also logically a bit more. They're based on communication sites, and when they roll out, they're going to come with some some more my whatever web parts. So we'll be able to make them more personalized and more focused on the person who lands on them. Those web parts will be available for any communication site. They won't only be locked to the home site.
We already have an existing, so we have a modern site, right? We've got our main hub, that's our kind of our landing page for our company. So can I convert that to a home site? Do I have to create a new home site and copy everything over?
Well, it's just a communication site. So if you've already got a communication site, you'll be able to give it the home site superpowers. And there are 2 superpowers that the home sites have, and my brain is not working. Who remembers? They're not, oh, I know what they are. They're not like big, massive things, but both when you're on like office.com or whatever, it knows where home is, and that home site doesn't have to be at the root of the site of the tenant, but it most likely would be. And the mobile app is going to have a little home button, and that's where you'll land. Okay, so it will become a sort of de facto landing spot. And also the SharePoint homepage is going to be improved so that the 2 of them work together, right? So the home site is where you want people to go to see the stuff about your organization. And SharePoint Home is going to get more enhancements to make it sort of an even more personalized version of the sort of slice at that stuff. You know how right now you see the news that's relevant to you because you're following sites at the top of that home page? It's going to get some more love. It's going to change a bit as part of this home site launch out. In the beginning, just seeing what's next. In the beginning, there will be only 1 home site per tenant. But if you think about it, the use case that I talked to a couple of Microsoft people about was, well, they've got Microsoft and they've got LinkedIn. And the people who work, all those people work in the same company, but they don't really care about the same things, right? So you might want to have a different home site for different sets of people. And those sets of people might be dynamic. Somebody might move from Microsoft to LinkedIn or LinkedIn to Microsoft. And so their homepage should change based on the dynamic nature of how you're redirecting people to a homepage. So I think that's where that's going. I think we've wanted something, we've built things like that many times, I think, in the past, doing a lot of work, coming up with all kinds of fancy redirects and stuff like that. So I think the mechanisms there will be part of the idea.
Where is global navigation? In other words, if this is part of a hub site, where's global nav?
That's a good question. They know that's a problem. I think it's in some of the roadmap slides. So there are a couple things that people are struggling with right now. So with a hub site, you get that hub site navigation. For some organizations, depending on the size and complexity and whatever, that's global navigation. That's enough. But it's not permission trimmed. So if you put stuff up there, I may have links to things that I can click on, but I can't get there, which is sort of against the rules in SharePoint land. We don't like to do that, right? So permission trimming it is definitely on one of the roadmap slides. And then thinking about navigation on a more global level is also something that's on. I can't remember whether it's in like the next round of stuff or the we're thinking about it really hard section. We'll see if we can spot it when we get to the roadmap slides. All right, news. We talked about news a little bit. Anybody have questions about what's going on with news? I don't think there were any really big announcements about news. I think that the point is really that it's becoming a tool that a lot more people are using. I remember when it first rolled out, I actually was talking to Dan Holm about it, and he said, it's great, every team site has news. And I'm like, I'll just tell the people I work with what's going on. Why am I going to write an article about that? It just felt really weird. But now that there's this infrastructure for news to start rolling up and communication sites, I think it makes a lot more sense. So I think that news is just getting more and more usage. And you.
So I tried this when I first got into Modern. You can only have one site page's library, and it's the only library that holds on to news.
Correct.
News is a page. Do you know if there's any? I mean, it would be really helpful for organization to have more than one library in a site launch.
Yeah.
So I've had exactly the same problem.
Yeah.
It's funky when you try to do it too.
All you do is create a content type.
Try that.
All right. create a classification, and then you can classify each of the pages. The good news is your highlighted content web part can filter it out and create use.
I
Yeah.
tried that, I had the funkiest
Right.
experience.
So you can definitely add metadata to the site pages library so that you have different flavors. The big problem I see is that a news page itself is not a content type. It's a site page.
Site.
So it doesn't have its own content type. So distinguishing between pages and news pages is actually a little trickier than it ought to be. You have to look at the promoted state and check to see if it's equal to 2. That's a news item. That feels a little funky to me. I think it's a mistake that they didn't use a content type, but we are where we are. So you can sort of parse out what's in the site pages library based on some of these characteristics. And you can add your own metadata. And then highlighted content and the news web part and things like that will work.
I was trying to, in fact, I wound up adding a field to my site pages library so that I could designate which is business applications news, which is, we have within our IT site different flavors of our news. And so.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other way to think about it is sort of flip it around. If you've got flavors of news, should they be managed in different places, right? Distribute the content management as opposed to trying to manage all of your news in one place.
Yeah.
I have a client who's doing enterprise news. They've got a site called Enterprise News, and they're jamming every piece of news throughout the whole organization into that one library. That's backward,
Yeah.
right? Like the departments should have their own news, and we should be rolling things up. We let people manage it where the management should happen. And then you can use authoritative news sites. You bump up the importance of those sites a little bit.
This was
so
actually
they get,
department news segregated into 4 different sections depending on which person was in
Yeah.
charge of that news.
yeah. So I think news has sort of come into its own, yeah?
Is there anything about news pushing out to people who are following? It feels like it's very cold right now. I have to go to
Yeah.
SharePoint and know to look at the app.
Right. Well, you know about the News Digest piece, right?
Either News Digest or anything, does a new article have an auto send to people who are following?
I don't think that there's an auto send yet.
There is a digest option.
There is a digest option, right?
There's a digest option, but somebody would have to send that out.
Yeah.
But it's actually really slick. You just activate digest and it shows all the news items and you can go through and select these. And there's a little summary. And you can send that out as a.
I think
Each one has a read more than 100.
Right.
I think they're trying to avoid some of the mistakes of the past. You know, that we used to force alerts on a lot of things to people, and then everyone would just set up a rule in Outlook to put all that shit into a folder they didn't have to look at, right? So having other ways for people to see the stuff that they want other than sending it into email is probably more what their focus is here. And I think, you know, making it surfacing news in Teams would be an example. You know, if you're already there, then that's a good place to do it. Yeah. The whole, like, should it be Outlook? Should it be Teams? Should it be one of the other 78 inboxes I now have in this small organization is a real question. But, you know, when I want to stay informed of the news as a person, I should be figuring out where to go. It's the communication departments that want to ram everything down everyone's throats, and that doesn't work either. So there's something in the middle. And if you're in communications and I offended you, I'm sorry, but that happens a lot. Okay, sites, nothing new there. Microsites, what was that? I don't remember. It'll be on another slide. Demos, we don't have any demos. We don't need no stinking demos. Okay, so anybody have questions about hubs? It seemed like a lot of people, I think I asked and a bunch of people were using them. No? Yes? Yes. People are using hubs.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
I thought maybe I went into a time warp. So hubs are definitely working very well in a lot of organizations. You know, they're ways to group things together. The longer they're around, I think the more you're going to appreciate them, because when you have a reorg or something, you can move a site from one hub to another hub. Has anyone had to do that yet?
No, but we're planning for it. Because
Yeah.
we have a situation where we're doing early stage R&D, and the plan is to move from the early stage R&D hub to the later stage R&D hub, to the
Yep.
process development hub, to the manufacturing hub, or even the program management hub.
Cool,
So
cool. That's a great use case. Yeah,
I've sent stuff up like that. We have active projects and archive
Yeah.
projects.
yeah. Another good use case. Yeah. So I think that's going to work really well. Again, you have the branding that can apply. The branding from the hub site will apply to those sites. So if you move it from the blue hub site to the green hub site, that's good because then they sort of look different, which I think is visual cues like that are really helpful. But then you can also have site designs that run anytime you associate, as I mentioned before, anytime you associate with a hub site. So for instance, if you go from whatever your stages were, stage 1 to stage 2, and in stage 1 you needed these 3 lists, but in stage 2 you need those 3 lists and these other 2, then that site design can start to, you sort of build up that site as it goes through that process. So that's pretty slick. So I think the theming is nice because you get that consistency. They're actually I think it's already rolled out. Yeah.
So prior to SharePoint hubs, I was a big fan of metadata-driven navigation.
Yep.
Which does not play well with hubs
No, it does not.
at all.
That's old tech, and it's not gonna. So that's that. You're talking about driven off of the term store.
Yeah,
Yeah. So the term store definitely needs some love.
it really does.
It really does, and that's on one of the roadmap slides. I mean, they know that. Not only does it not do the things it needs to do, it's just a pain in the neck to work with. The UI is horrible, right? So that's a SharePoint 2010 thing. So that's over 10 years old.
Actually, Mark, that's one of the challenges right now working in modern is, what site features work anymore?
Yeah.
Like, what's a danger to turn on and what should we use below? And
Yeah.
that's a real challenge right now.
I'm
not touching anything anymore.
Vesa Juvonen just gave me a new repo in the PNP, SharePoint PNP realm. It's called SP Usage Docs.
Ooh.
So you're going to write an article for that talks about that, because those are the kinds of things that I think people struggle with. It's not what do people click on to make something happen. It's why would I do this, or how would I make this decision, or what's a better practice. I don't say best practice anymore because there's no such thing. And we're trying, and you'll see there's almost nothing in there right now because we're just getting started, but I would love to start. Perfect. Let's talk. So I think that we're getting into this age where the technical documentation is so covered. If you're a developer, there's more out there than you could possibly ever read or ever find. It used to be we barely could find anything that would tell us how things work. But from a end user information architecture, power user, citizen developer perspective, I think we have a real gap. So anyway, that was a little plug. So those decisions are hard to make because we're sort of in this, I keep talking about chasms that we're crossing at the moment. I think we're actually pretty far across the chasm from classic to modern, from sort of wanting to go there and having there be enough to get you there in a compelling way. But if you're still in classic, you've got to answer questions like that. What have I been doing that's still going to work, and what should I be doing differently now that I'm over there, right? And if we write that stuff up, then they won't have to hire me as a consultant. They can just read your stuff. That'd be perfect. All right. Another article about another page thing about hubs, same slide. So I've been doing slides like this for a while. We really think we're moving to a much more flat topology, right? We used to do these pyramids, right, in Classic with a site collection that's got a root site and then lots of subsites, whether it's subdepartments or functions or sub-projects or whatever. And we've got really used to doing that over the years. And now we're building this big sort of flat topology. And when we think about using hubs to bring things together, it starts to actually serve a similar function to subsites. And a lot of people say, well, then why don't we just use hub sites? Because you get a lot of different stuff that, the ability to move things around easily, all that sort of stuff. I think that we have a lot more flexibility in how we organize stuff. And then with that home site coming in sort of at the top, if you will, we'll have a better landing page that helps people get from place to place. So, in a smaller organization, a hub site is a perfectly good landing page. There's nothing wrong with the homepage of a hub site as an intranet. But I think in slightly more complex organizations, having that home site be sort of at the top level, leading you to hub sites might be a nice option as well. SharePoint start page, which is going to get better. So, any other questions about home sites? They're not there yet, so we actually haven't seen them per se. Like I said, they'll be they'll have the superpower of when you click a home button, you land there. But also there are a couple things that come with it. I don't know if you can tell from looking at this, but this is a right rail that goes all the way down the page. So different layout options are going to come along with it. It's not really for the home site itself, but when they demo a home site, they're showing some of the new layout options. Because we have layouts that go all the way across the page now, and we have tough time laying things out. So a rail that goes all the way down from top to bottom is sort of nice. So the themes again, communications and employee experiences. So that's really the intranet idea. Knowledge sharing and discovery is getting into communities and helping people find content that they need. Shared content and business solutions. We've got the Power, what do we call it? Power Platform now. You got Flow, Business, Power Apps, and Power BI are part of that platform. You've got security and governance sitting underneath all of this, and of course there's customization and extensibility. How many people have been working with the SharePoint framework? As opposed to the old way we used to build web parts, what do you think? Yeah? Well, that's an opinion.
No, it's yes and no. I mean, it works. Once you get the development environment about and you get used to asynchronous JavaScript, then yeah, it's actually quite clean to build.
Yeah.
Moving up to the CDN, that means.
That shouldn't be too bad, but I can imagine that it can be. The other nice thing, I think, is that we get a lot of componentry now. There's a lot of open source stuff out there, things like the field controls and the property controls and all this, like a people picker. We don't have to build a people picker ever again. If you've ever had to build something like a people picker, you know that you're happy about that. So all of those components that are open source, and we all can contribute to those components. Some of them are from the Office UI fabric, so obviously Microsoft is doing that piece. But then there are open source versions for SharePoint Framework web parts, for example, that are like that repo is managed by Elio Streif, and he's an awesome dude, and that thing just keeps revving, and he keeps adding new features. I've wanted to use something and said, it'd be really cool is if we had this thing, and he's like, okay, and 3 days later that's there in the dev branch. So that's how fast things are moving from an extensibility standpoint.
You mentioned Power Platform earlier.
Yep.
Is that actually a new thing, or is that just a new name for an old thing?
I think they're trying to sort of pitch, especially Flow and Power Apps, as being part and parcel of the same platform. When I work in Flow and I work in Power Apps, and I don't do oodles of either, but they feel like different products to me. So they don't feel like, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of shared experience from a developer standpoint, but I think that's what they're aiming at.
Yeah, I agree. They feel completely different.
Yeah.
But whenever I'm doing architecture planning, I'm definitely using the two side by side and interacting with each other a lot.
Sure. Yeah. So I think from that perspective,
it makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a business process that you want to implement, you'll probably have a form, and you'll probably want to do something with that data. Those are the two tools that will help you do that. Or their older siblings, Logic Apps and the other thing, Power Apps. So Flow goes to Logic Apps, and Power Apps goes to, SharePoint Framework Web Parts would be your next step. So if you can either build forms, and we have to put forms in big quotes because Microsoft has a product called Forms, all kinds of other things. So, but if you want to build something on a screen that people put data into, you've got Power Apps, you've got potentially the SharePoint framework if you want to build something that's very, very complex and bespoke.
Can I make a plug and or a question or comment? There's a thing called the Fabulous 40 that we used to have in the classic. Yes. There is now a modern version of that, the Fabulous 40. It's the FX Fab 40. It is marvelous. Yeah, it is. There's one of the stuff that it doesn't work, why I built them myself. But the rest of them are fantastic.
The solutions library, is it that one?
It's yes.
It's on GitHub.
It's on GitHub.
Yeah. So there are two. There's SPF. I can't remember the names of them, but there's one that's like SPFX examples, and there are 100 of them probably. Yeah. And then there's another one that are supposed to be sort of solutions. So it might be multiple web parts that work together, or it's more complex stuff. So for instance, the modern search web parts that are in the solutions project, that is awesome. If you're waiting for search to catch up to what it used to be, go check out the modern search web parts, because they basically give you search results, refiners, paging, all the stuff that you're used to, but working in a modern environment. So yeah, all of these. If you're not looking at what's out there in GitHub under github.com/SharePoint would be where you would start. If you're not looking at that stuff and you're writing code, you're really working too hard. Way, way, way too hard. And if you're not a coder and your development team says, oh, it's going to take 6 months to do this, it's just not going to take that long, because the stuff that's out there it's componentry that you can glue together. So, I think if you're not a developer, understanding what's out there at least a little bit will help your discussions with developers, because the world has changed a lot in the last year or two as far as what we can put together and what the speed, the development speed can be. All right, so this roadmap sort of at a high level based on those slides that I just went to. Did we miss anything here that anybody wants to talk through? Everyone loves reading slides, right? This one's a cool one. You probably have some notion of this in your organization where the person who puts the content into the system isn't the person who gets credit for it, right? So some notion of the executive assistant or the marketing person or whoever writing something for someone else and not leaving their fingerprints all over it, even though their fingerprints really are all over it. That's that concept. They know that that's something that's pretty important. Anything else? There? No? Okay.
Will that original author be available on the back end for a site owner to kind of delve into?
Yeah, I think that the created by and modified by idea isn't going to go anywhere. You still, if you think about it, that's sort of the auditability piece of it, right? That's not going to go away. But even now, you have the notion, like with a news post or a site page, you have the header, and you can put a person in the header,
right?
And that person that field is actually called the author byline. So it sort of does a little bit of that, but it's not maybe as pervasive. And that's also the person who shows up when you have roll-ups of news stories or something. So I'm not exactly sure how much further they go there, but they want to do some more. Because they know that a lot of organizations, the people who do the work aren't the people who get the credit for the work. It's a bummer,
But
isn't
you
it?
also need to know who to blame.
Yes, right. You spelled that wrong. Yeah, but it's your article. Yeah, but... All right, so this is a deck of a lot of roadmap slides. We could spend days on each one. There was a four-day conference. Obviously, we don't want to spend days on each one. I don't know what things you guys are interested in, so we can skip past some stuff. We can stop in places and talk about it. This one's about sites and business applications. Anything there catch your eye?
The very first one's been marked for rolling out now for quite a while.
The new files experience?
Yeah.
So getting full fidelity when you look at document library in Teams. I thought
Especially
that
the ability to change views.
yeah, I actually thought that was rolling out already.
They've said that it is.
Yeah, have you seen it? Do you have a full
I haven't seen it. I haven't
first
seen it in a
release
while.
tenant?
I have a first release tenant
Yeah.
myself, and some of my clients also have first release,
Yeah.
and I haven't seen it in any of them.
Sometimes they pause because they've had some sort of problem. The idea there is when you have a document library or a list in a SharePoint in a SharePoint site, you can do all kinds of cool stuff to it now. You know, you can have nice views that group stuff. You can have different views. You can use column formatting or view formatting to actually make that content look pretty much like anything. You can have cards, you can have rows, you can do whatever you want. There are all kinds of cool things there. If you do all of that, you want to be able to see that the fidelity of what you've done there, not just in the library itself, but also when you put the library on a page in a web part in SharePoint. You know, if I just add a web part to the page, I ought to be able to see it the way I built it over here. And then also in Teams. So if I put a document library on it or a list on a tab in Teams, I ought to get that same full fidelity. So essentially, it should look exactly the same in any of those places that it's exposed. If it's not, I mean, if you haven't seen it yet, it will be, I mean, I think it's imminent. You know, this isn't 6 months away. That's,
Is there a question online in that middle column later this year, two up to the bottom? Guest access to Power App forms. Is this referring to Power Apps portal that was just recently announced?
no, I think the Power Apps, well, the Power Apps portal is almost like an external website, but intended to expose Power Apps in them. You know people are going to use them as an external website, though. I think that the idea for the guest access to Power Apps form extends also in, so if you've got external users who can go into a site and you've got a Power App embedded in a page, they should be able to interact with that. I don't think they can right now. I think they actually see an error or an empty space, right? So sort of bringing that capability up to the same level for everybody who has access to the site is the idea there.
Do you know anything about improved quick edit?
So quick edit is definitely better than datasheet view.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay,
Marc, we
it's
actually
supposed
found
to
a
be
bug
better
in
than, huh?
We found a bug in Quicken. One of my end users found a bug 2 weeks ago. We're working with Microsoft on it. All we're in standard release. All of a sudden, her all items view which has not been touched. She lost her quick edit. And our developer we work with realized if we entered the title field, it came back. And all of a sudden, any new views we created, all of a sudden we had no quick edit unless we added the title field.
The title field has to be in
We're in
the view.
standard view, so we've been able to repeat it a couple of times. We're working with Microsoft right now. We did it. She gets the golden IT ticket once we.
Awesome.
confirm it's a,
Someone was asking me, I said, oh, because you customize it, once you touch the view, then you edit it, but it goes away.
It's random.
No.
Yeah,
It's random. It's
That sounds
random. It comes
like,
and
that
goes.
sounds like they introduced a bug. We'll call that a regression. I don't think that's intentional either.
But definitely
I
not-
know the guy who broke that. Lincoln?
And that came out so that I can-
We're still recording.
Yeah, that sounds really quirky. So anyway, quick edit right now it's supposed to be better than datasheet view. Datasheet view is based on an ActiveX control. ActiveX controls don't really, they're ancient. Quick edit should work for most column types fairly well. They want it to work really well. One of the things that they demonstrated was, I don't know if you saw this, but when you have column formatting in place, so like this thing turns red if it's above a certain value or green if it's below another value, you actually see that in the quick edit. So as you're changing values, you're seeing the stuff change in the quick edit view. So it's again sort of elevating a lot of the functionality that's part of the standard view into the quick edit.
I think right now, multi-line text.
It works, but it doesn't feel good,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you only get a little space, right? It doesn't work as well.
But it also depends on how you formatted that column, whether it's rich
Yeah.
text or whether it's plain text. Plain text. don't
Yeah,
work.
sure,
Rich
yeah,
text
sure.
doesn't.
Plain text, I usually use plain text, so yeah, you're right. You're right. So they know where the holes are there, and they want to improve it, probably beyond the stuff that you even care about. Like, like that column formatting thing, I think is really cool, because then you're seeing the changes as you're putting in the data. The required, how they have the sort of mustardy color required, that should show up in the quick edit as well. Right now you just get white, it doesn't give you any of those visual cues. You don't have a recent, you don't have a lot of the little icons you're used to seeing. I think they're going to try and bring those in as well.
Actually, last week I did a demo and we actually yellow. I had one field that didn't come in, it was a required field, didn't come in. Whole thing turned yellow on me. I got a nice little red spot right where I need.
In the quick line, in quick edit.
Yeah, in quick edit,
Okay.
more standard release,
So they snuck that in. Cool. All right. So you'll probably see some of those incrementally. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Is there going to be a way for people to see what team sites they're a part of for end users? Because right now we're just searching for ones that they know they're a part of.
There's actually a web part called, I think it's called My Teams, or not My Teams, My Sites. Yeah, you might want to check that. There is a sites. There's a sites web part, and if it's not called My Sites, it's called Sites.
Okay.
And one of the things that you can do is filter it to the sites that the person has either is a member of. Well, the permissions will do that, but
yeah.
It's sort of like taking the view that's on the SharePoint homepage and putting it into another page, right? Because the SharePoint homepage shows you your favorites or your recents.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of.
But that doesn't tell you everything. All the ones that you're a part of.
Right.
Your
Check that web part though.
Okay.
Some of the configuration options might get you there.
Sure.
I'm not sure it gets you exactly there, but
Sure. Okay.
it's a good starting point. Yeah.
You know anything about column sets?
Column sets. Yeah, that's a cool one. So
Sounds like content type and light.
it's like content chunks.
Yeah.
Right.
That's cool.
So if you think about what they're doing with location fields now, right? So like you can this hasn't rolled out yet either. They demoed location fields.
It's out.
It's out?
We just
Okay.
did now.
Where you type in an address and it actually looks up the address, you select it, and it fills in a bunch of bunch of columns with those values. That's out. Okay.
Yes,
It's been out since February. February.
Old stuff.
I've seen it sell.
So if you think about that, it's a bunch of fields, a bunch of columns that sort of work together as a unit. That's what column sets is like. So you will be able to define column sets. So not just a field type, but a column set that is a bunch of fields that do something to each other. So you could think about that as
Can we
maybe.
define that, or they're just going to be presets like?
I would expect that it'll probably be pretty simple to start with. But if you think about something like cascading dropdowns, those are fields that work, or columns that work together. And I think that the hard part for them is going to be to come up with a UI that helps you build these things. But you can imagine you would have I can't wait for the new concept of a content type hub. I mean, that thing needs to die and be replaced, but gracefully. But you can imagine also a UI where you build these column sets and then sort of, I could see it in my head, it's so cool, and you sort of drag and drop them together into content types. It gives me shivers. By the way, metadata is still really, really important. I think Microsoft screwed up over the last year or two and made it sound like AI and machine learning is going to make, why would we need metadata? The cloud will just show us what we need. No, that's not true. So, especially when you've got a business process, you need metadata. So I think that they're doubling down on making that stuff work well. Yeah.
So here's the question, list columns versus site columns. It's clear that Microsoft is driving us towards list columns because it's making it so easy to make list columns. Everything is done off this UI now.
Yeah.
Are site columns going away?
No. No, not at all.
I'm advertising there's something reusable, but.
So if you use the content type hub?
Way back when, yeah.
Yeah. So, what we used to do is we would just add columns to a list and hope that it never needed to be used anywhere else, and we were great. Then we started to use site columns, and those site columns could be available across a site collection, if we built them at the root, and the content types based on those site columns could be available across the site collection. But now as we're going from this to this, we need a way to roll out that information architecture in a better way. The content type hub serves that purpose, but it's not up to the task.
It's not in Marc.
No, it works. The content type hub works great. Sorry, it doesn't work great.
Build one in Marc.
It still does exactly the same thing that it's always done for a modern site.
You gotta switch to classic to build it.
Nope, you don't have to. If you build stuff in the content type hub and you publish it, those content types will end up in every one of those sites that you've got.
So in modern, I can take a site collection. What do I do? A class? Do I do a communication site or a team site? And does that?
No. Content type hub is its own preset site.
Right.
You can't build a content type hub.
Right.
There's one that's in there. And the address for it is /sites/content type hub.
Right in my
So if you go there.
If you're in the cloud.
That site is a classic site, but its propagation and the way that it pushes out, it works absolutely the same for classic and
I'd
modern
be
sites.
hot heaven if it's so just.
It does. It absolutely does. But if you have not been using the content type hub, I would say don't start.
Okay.
Start to look at site designs and site scripts, because that's a way to roll out consistent information architecture, and you have to focus on that item potency thing, and you have to think about it a little bit more. You need to write some JSON, but that will be probably that will be a better path for you over the long term. So if you've got a bunch of stuff in the content type hub, you're there. You can't move it right now. But for future stuff, you probably want to use the site designs.
We have a question online. Can you talk a little bit about using SharePoint framework to customize MS Teams?
Customize teams? Sure. So the SharePoint framework ability to add, so the ability to create a SharePoint framework web part that can also be added to Teams, I think came out in SharePoint framework 1.7. Does that sound right? And essentially, anything you build that can go into SharePoint can also go into Teams. The good thing about it is that you have different contexts. So you have a context when you're in SharePoint, and you have a context when you're in Teams. So you can detect which one you're in and have the web part generally react a little differently because you're in a different environment. So you can do more teaming-like stuff over here or more SharePoint-y-like stuff over there because you have that context, and you can make your code react to that. So at this point, if you're building SharePoint framework web parts, it's really just making a choice when you build them whether they should be available in Teams or not. And the deployment story is a little bit different, but not all that different. Did I answer that question?
I think so.
Well, I mean, they're not in here, so who cares? Right? Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's been running for a while, and I think a lot of people are having good luck with that.
Mark, what does list from lists really mean?
Where are we?
Fourth one down.
List from list includes custom.
List from Excel. What does it really mean?
Oh, that one. Here. Yeah. This is cool.
Yeah, that's really.
Yeah, so lots of times we build a list and then we say, this is a great list. And in the old days, we would save it as template, right? So this is a new UI where you basically say, I want to create a new list, and I want to create it based on a list that already exists. And I point to that list, and it creates a duplicate, a clone, not a duplicate, a clone. Not the content, but the structure. And then from Excel is what we've always wanted to have happen when we used to be able to connect Excel to a list or import it, and we'd get everything as strings or everything as unformatted, whatever. It's actually like a wizardy kind of thing that takes you through, and it looks at the content all the way down and says, this should be a numeric field. Want to change that? Nope, let's make that a string. This should be whatever. And so you get a list that's based on the content in the Excel file that has the right types. And really, I mean, it's slick. It works really well. It's fast. When they demo it, they don't have like a billion rows, but they have enough rows that you can tell it's really going to work. All right. That's one slide. SharePoint lists and libraries. There's some little stuff here that's going to make people so happy, like sticky headers. When you scroll down a page, the headers go away, and it's like, what's this column, right? So they're going to have sticky headers. Auto save the column order. So like if you drag and drop the columns into a different order, it'll auto save that. It's just some really little UI tweaks that I think are going to make people a lot happier.
The column totals in Modern, it's so weird, they put them at the top, I mean at the bottom.
The totals.
Yeah, instead of the top.
Instead of that weird place at
So
the
you
top
have the
that we're all
columns
used to.
here, now you want the totals, you gotta scroll through
That's true.
millions of rows.
Yeah, I'm still not wild about the sort of bottomless scroll feel of modern libraries. I mean, it's great from a performance perspective, but it feels strange still to me. I think they're always tweaking this stuff now. So the good thing is I think they've got they've got the basis, and now they can tweak for what works, which is a good place to be.
But if you have, 10,000 row list, you kind of scroll forever just to find the total.
Well,
That's
that's
in Classic, it was right there.
yeah, that's true. I see what you mean. Yeah. Put in a user voice. User voice. By the way, user voice. If you don't believe that that works, you should watch some of those things. Subscribe to one that you think is that's getting a lot of votes, and watch how fast something happens. They're really starting to crank through to some of this stuff. Best is starting to say no to some things, which I really don't think you should say no to, but yeah, like recurring events in modern, recurring events in modern. They basically have said no to. I think that's sort of a mistake, but modern document sets. Anyone a fan of document sets? Why not?
I thought that was going away.
No. Document sets rock, and they're going to modernize the whole UI of them. The whole way they work. They're sort of reimagining them as much as they can, but they're also going to have. You'll see actually if you have document sets today, they're already starting to look a little bit different in list view, in library views, just the way they show up. You're not kicked back into Classic immediately because you have document sets. So they're working on that. No big document set fans. Huh. You guys have been missing out, I'll tell you. Anything else catch an eye there? Nobody cares about lists and libraries.
Check out for flow actions, so are there any check and check out?
Which column are you in?
No, power team processes.
Power team check in. Oh, that's actually already in flow. You have an action to check an item or a document. Usually, you check it in or check it out. That was a big ask for quite a while. So later this year already happened. I don't know what grant access does exactly. It might be setting permissions somehow. Actually, was there? I don't know which slide it's on. Right now we have out-of-the-box list forms, list or library forms, and we've got Power Apps. And then we can, of course, do SharePoint Framework. So they've recognized that there's still sort of a gap between out-of-the-box and Power Apps. Power Apps can be a lot of work, though you can do basic stuff pretty quickly. So they're thinking about sort of a form customization light in between. So sort of a, maybe in that form UI kind of thing. They didn't demo anything, but it's on the I think it's like in the middle column of one of these slides. So that'll give people options to do things like a couple of things that they mentioned, like, if you fill in this field, then show this other field, otherwise keep it hidden. Just really basic stuff like that we find ourselves wanting to do all the time. And then they're being smart about it, and they're saying, well, let's make sure that we can sort of upscale that into a Power App. Let's not do something weird that sends it off into another direction that we can't then further enhance if we choose to. Content services. Anybody big into records management or any of that stuff? Nope.
Well, you just got like a little nod back there from Dimitri. No, we're like, woo! So we'll just keep going. Lists, hide, show, hide, reorder, and list forms. That was the thing I was just talking about. I don't know what they're doing with image and URL fields exactly. Modern quick edit, we talked about a little bit. Has anyone used column formatting or view formatting? So have you been writing JSON, or were you able to do it with a little widgety thing?
I used to copy some other.
Copied somebody else's? Yeah, cool, that works, hey, right. But they're continuing to improve the UI. So like right now you can, in the UI, sort of set gate, like, you know, above 10 is red and the next color is green or whatever. That's the UI that they have. They're thinking about how to build more of a rules-based thing, like conditional formatting in Excel. I mean, I think that's a good model. It'll sort of head in that direction. Alternate rows view style, it's just such an obvious thing, right? Just zebra striping the rows so that you can read them more easily. Tile-based view support in JSON, I think that's just further enhancing the view formatting.
You know, one of the things I'd love to see, just really simple, because the one time that I tried to look up in JSON, it was because I had created a list. I forget if it was a list or a document library, but it was something where I had metadata and I wanted one of those metadata columns to be clickable to open the item.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the title, you know, something other than the title. And just assigning that was actually very problematic in JSON.
With column? Really? Okay.
As somebody who has never written JSON before, and that was my first attempt, and just doing that little thing.
So there's another GitHub repo. What is it?
Column formatter.
Yeah, basically. Chris Kent runs that one.
Pointed me out to that.
Chris and his war horses. By the way, there are calls now, like every other day, where it's either for developers or like the column formatting thing is often a demonstration on the sort of dev community one. These calls are awesome. People are showing examples of how to do stuff like that, and then here's the code. You know, so again, if you're not using the PNP get stuff on GitHub, you're working way too hard. That there is absolutely an example of that there, where you want, you know, something, some link to trigger something from. Opening that particular item's edit panel might be harder, but you could certainly send them. You could certainly send them, you know, load the page that represents that edit panel, as opposed to opening it in that page. I'm not sure if you could do that.
There is just an example for sending that you can do custom format. Just copy that and you could actually add like a picture with the mailbox next to the people feed, so that if you click that, it actually opens out the custom message.
Yeah. So there's probably something close if it's not exactly what you want. Flows, I'm pretty sure I saw document check-in and check-out just yesterday or something, so I think that's already there. Creating a folder seems like such a basic thing, but that's another thing that they're getting in there. Yeah, the grant access is setting permissions. That's right, access management stuff. I'll stop anywhere you want. Power apps. If you've worked with things like lookup columns or long lists of choices, you know that can be a real pain in the neck with these delegated permissions. It's way too techy. It's not an end user kind of thing. It's not a power user kind of thing. They're trying to make that stuff smarter. Support for document libraries, that's a big one. So a Power App for a document library, so you can customize that form to look the way you want it. Groups. Does anyone care about groups anymore? Huh?
Quick question.
Yeah.
So for delegation for SharePoint, what's the limit for the delegation? Kind of hear from people from Power Apps, don't use SharePoint because you run into delegation issues of items.
Yeah, this is a problem where this is a mobile first thing, right? So it's 500 items. So if you don't, if you want more than 500 items, you sort of have to page through them. And that's a very low number to me. I mean, about 5,000 item limit feels pretty low to me too. But if you think about the responsiveness of the form itself, I mean, it's actually, it's a smart thing not to go and fetch more stuff than that. So there's some things you can do with collections that definitely help. And if you can filter your collections and grab them as you need them, you can usually get around. I mean, not around it, but you can make it work better. I mean, I actually think it sort of forces you into thinking a little better.
And I hear from people like use CBS in terms of if I handle because
Sorry?
use CBS.
Yeah.
If you have more than 500 because it's more responsive. And you don't run it, delegation is what
I think to me, yes, maybe, right? But just hauling in some bigger iron just because your UI isn't doing what you think you want it to do, I think should make you think, should I be doing this in my UI, right? So yes, so CBS is the common data service, so that gives you another layer of horsepower to provide some interaction with content. So it's certainly an option, but I've seen some pretty awful things built in Power Apps and anywhere else because people aren't thinking about the user on the other side of the glass, right? They make it work, but it doesn't work well. So that to me would be the first thing to think about, and then think about scaling up because of volume or something. I was having a discussion with somebody on Facebook the other day in a group that Andrew Connell runs, and he was like, I just can't understand why lookup columns don't work when there are more than 5,000 items. And it's like, dude, oh my God. How are you? And it's like, yeah, but people are signing up for things, and we want to make sure we can see all the people who've ever signed up for this particular thing. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Yeah, but you made it work, but should it work that way? It was one of those discussions. It was like, no, it should be more than 5,000. It's like, I get what you're saying. I don't like the 5,000 number, but that's a bad idea. So building it so that you type a couple characters and then you see the results, it will get you under 500 usually, or something. You think about how can you give a UI widget that's going to help you get there as opposed to worrying about that limitation. All right, so Office 365 groups. You guys all read this while I was talking, right? You totally got it. Okay, cool. Oh, there's more. Oh, this is the InfoPath and SharePoint Designer roadmap. This is an important one. Yeah. If you're still building stuff in InfoPath, you're probably doing it because you know how to use InfoPath. It's never going to get better. It's never going to change. It won't stop working in 2026, but they won't support it anymore. So just start to think another way. Anyone still building InfoPath? Good for you. And SharePoint Designer. Some people are still using SharePoint Designer workflows because they're used to it. And I think
there's still some missing functionality in plug.
So what specifically?
He's telling me he's using Designer because he can't do what it is he needs to do in Flow. I can't tell you exactly.
But what it is the important thing. And if your opinion is based on trying something more than a few months ago, you really have to keep checking. Yeah.
This is something recent. We built in the past month.
Sometimes there's limitation, but I feel like all the functionality is there. We run into a 30-day limitation.
Yeah, that goes.
But everything else.
Lots of times it turns out that it's not a limitation, it's that you do it a different way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make sense yet to you. I just think if you're firing up SharePoint Designer, you really ought to be thinking about it pretty hard about why.
The workaround we came to is okay, what is the process window? All right, let's do a trigger field that kicks it off and buys us another week. So we're in that window.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can set up flows to be quite modular too, because you can have a flow call a flow through an HTTP request. So you can build these atomic things that are reusable as well.
I don't know that answers your particular issue there, but that's another, you sort of break things up into their pieces and you build sort of reentrant stuff as opposed to with SharePoint Designer workflows, we ended up with these ginormous things because we're trying to do everything in one workflow because we can't trust whether this one's going to run before that one. But with flows calling flows, you know what sequence it's going to happen in. Yeah.
So I was a huge advocate for SharePoint Designer, and it can still do tons of things that there's no other interface for. All of the conditional access that you're talking about, we're hoping to get this soon. SharePoint Designer could do that back in 2010.
But it can't do it for modern.
Right, but
right?
only because they discontinued it.
Yeah.
Came out.
Yeah.
But all of that functionality used to be there. The conditional
Sure.
access, the hide this on that,
Yeah.
changing the colors, and also for managing any list that had a large number of columns.
Yep.
You could multiple select those columns, you could search the columns, you could deactivate them.
Yep. I was one of the founding members of the SharePoint Designer fan club,
Yeah.
so I mean you don't need to convince me that it was awesome. I don't use it anymore because I don't think I need it anymore.
I don't use it anymore because I work with SharePoint Online and I can't.
Well, you still can. You can still do things with lists, for example, but I think you probably are finding that you don't need to as often, right? There are a lot of the things that we used to feel like we wanted to go and use SharePoint Designer for, we just don't have that feeling anymore because there are other tools.
It could build forms much cleaner and faster than Power Apps.
Depends on. I'm with you. I could do things with data view web parts that boggled people's minds, but most people did not, right? So.
Sure, but I'm not talking in-depth, super.
That's a great conversation for beers after.
Yeah,
okay.
Somebody said online with regards to input paths, just build a bridge and get over it.
Yeah.
Someone else said that, not me.
No, you would never say that, but yeah. Now you got to bite the bullet at some point, right? We don't ride those big bicycles with the front wheel like this and the little back wheel anymore because the bicycles got better.
Like there are long run flows coming up pretty soon. Instead of 30 days, you can go beyond 30 days. The flows can actually go longer than 30 days.
Yes, they've bumped that up, right? And you know what that limit is.
It's out now.
Yeah.
Over 30 is all I saw.
Yeah, over 30.
Yes.
It's not 30, it's over 30.
Over 30.
Yeah.
Just like me, I'm over 30.
Yeah, that was a pretty scary limitation. So that's definitely a help. Does anyone use page templates in site pages libraries? Pretty cool, right? Yeah, really helpful if you want to create consistent pages with common layouts or a set of web parts. Sort of getting toward the publishing model, but a modern thinking of the same thing. Yeah. I know it's in targeted release. Does anyone have it in standard release? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you go, it's sort of weird when you want to create a new page. You get a better experience if you start from the home page of the site than you do if you're in the site pages library. The drop down in the site pages library doesn't give you the options that it gives you in the home page. So if you, yeah, and that's another. So there are like 3 or 4 different places you can do it, and the experience is not the same. They really need to fix that. Yeah, it's like, well, why can't I do it from here? I don't know. It's not my fault. It's Microsoft's fault. Audience targeting. Has anyone seen any of that show up yet? No, I think that's one of those things that it was supposed to be out in March, and they had some problems. So it's another one of those. It could be any minute kind of things. And it will be similar to the way audience targeting used to work, except without all of that weird compiling audiences thing. It's supposed to work better. And nobody's asked a question. Is anybody in the ether there?
Questions? Yeah, we can shoot them off.
Branding. We talked about page templates.
I could debate over viability of Designer online, but no questions.
I'm sure there's an active debate. Organizational assets. Has anyone seen that in a demo?
No.
So,
looking forward to that, though.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool one. So the place you'll notice it the most often is when you're going to add an image to a header on a page as you're creating it.
you've got a bunch of places you can get that image. You could upload it. You can do a web search. You can grab the most recent thing, whatever. There will be a new line there that's organizational assets, and that'll be a curated set of assets that your organization has decided are a standard set of assets. There's some industries like pharma that, this is the stuff you're allowed to use, and it's right here. And that'll be, I think the way that'll work is you'll basically designate a library to be that thing. I'm not sure how much control you have over where it goes, but I think it can be anywhere. Probably.
A single library.
Huh?
Start out with a single library.
Yeah, single library.
Yeah, and I'll behave the same way a normal.
Yeah, thought so.
Is
And
that
that,
like an app that chooses an organizational asset, or is it something you configure in the library settings?
I think you configure it through, the configuration I've seen has been early. It's the PowerShell
Yeah.
configuration.
yeah, I think that'll be the starting.
And I think that they're looking at interfaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. The integration with Office is also interesting. I want to do. But they're planning on allowing, so the idea is that you'll be able to take those templates and take PowerPoint templates, put them in that location, and then have them show up within the applications. So previously where you get better templates. That's my future.
This one seems to make a lot of people happy. I thought 100 was a pretty big number. But 2,000 websites. How about it, kids? Yeah, maybe. I mean, just because you can, should you?
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't that just opening the door for people to not use them, right?
Probably. I mean, I think 100 was a nice number because it made you think about it, right? Should this be a hub site? That should always be a pause, right?
Yeah.
Should I do this? Well, the limit's so high, I'll just go ahead and do it. And that's less from I mean, it's not a technical question, it's an information architecture perspective. Does it make sense? Does it provide a value?
If you have a large organization, I think 100 was scary low.
It sounded very low to big organizations, and 2,000 sounds really big to a lot of people. I talked to somebody who was like, 2,000 is never going to be enough. I'm like, okay, I don't
know. 100 was you have to be careful.
Yeah.
2,000 is you have to worry about.
Yeah, I think it started out as 50. Yeah, that really scared me.
Hub of hubs.
I want
That's
some
what I
hubs.
want.
Nested hubs. You want subsites is what you want. Well, the sort of hub of hubs, what about the home page? The home site, sorry.
Not until they give me the navigation back.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I like this one.
Shiny header?
All that stuff the stuff at the top of the page that everyone says, can you make that smaller?
Yes.
Have it like act shy, right?
Yeah.
Get out of the way.
Focus on content.
At least the header is, it used to be this big. Now you can at least make it this big. But I'm working on a client machine that's got a crappy monitor, and I mean it's almost half the page just to get to the content.
Are you talking about the sweet bar or underneath that?
Underneath the sweet bar, the header. So the sweet bar is sort of sacrosanct. They've put that search box up in there, which I think is a good thing because it gets it out of all the other pages, right? It's always up there now, or it will be if you're not in targeted release or first release or whatever they call it these days. But yeah, the header itself. Modern pages, web parts and news. There's a lot of repetition here because these are the roadmap sites that were at the end of each of the sessions. So that's why I feel like I can skip past a lot of stuff. Page templates. Yeah, we already talked about that. Anything else here?
Undo, redo.
Undo, redo, gotta give me that back. Oh,
That's nice.
Oh, right, within pages. Yeah. There's that vertical column I talked about.
Duplicate parts and sections. That sounds cool.
Yeah, that'd be nice, huh?
Yeah.
There's a question about ghost offering.
What's that?
We talked about that on one of the other slides. It's when
Chrissy, pay attention.
It's
I was paying attention.
delegated off.
when am I supposed to stop?
When you have your girl take care of it for you.
Now?
Very soon.
I'm done. Has anyone looked at, this used to be called custom learning. The Microsoft 365 learning pathways just flows off the tongue so much more easily. Microsoft 365 learning pathways. This is a really cool thing. Has anyone looked at it?
I want to turn it on, but that environment.
So this is it's a, what's the right word for it? It's like a PNP site template. It's not a site template. I don't know what the words are. It's escaping me. But there's a site, pnpprovisioning.azurewebsites.com, I think, and it's got. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's Azure.
And it's got a bunch of sites that you can provision into your tenant basically by logging in and pushing a button. It's that simple, and you can tell it where in the where you want what URL you want it to go to. One of the things here is this Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways, which is a it's a learning site that has content, curated content from Microsoft about how to use the platform, and then you can augment that or hide that stuff and put in your own stuff and build these like learning playlists and have assets in there that you manage yourself, or you leave the Microsoft there and they're going to keep refreshing their stuff. So if this works well, they'll be curating the content that explains how to use the platform as opposed to you. That would be really cool because they're supposed to know what they're changing faster than we know what they're doing. We'll see, because they're going to have to keep up with it now. That's going to be their burden. But it's slick, and I happen to know it's really cool because my colleague Julie Turner has been working on it. So,
Mark, so if I click this on, it's going to create a whole new site collection for me. Is it a communication site? Is it a team site?
It's a communication site. Yeah.
I can hub that somewhere?
You can hub it.
I'm using it as a verb now.
You can turn it into a hub site, sure. I'm not sure you'd want
No,
to.
I want to hub it to another hub.
You want to associate it with a hub site.
I prefer hub.
You can do that. Yeah.
If you look for the word hub it in the UI, you're not going to find it. Associate it with a hub site. Yeah, you could. I'm not sure you would. I think it may be something that sort of stands on its own, but if it made sense, sure, why not?
I'd almost hub it up under IT since IT is responsible for this stuff.
Yeah.
For learning and development.
Yeah, I think if you use this, if you use it and sort of dig in and think about what you can do with it, it shouldn't belong to any department. It should be a place people go to learn stuff.
Well, we replaced what I now have as a SharePoint Center of Excellence. So I'm basically manually doing this right now, and we replace that. I would take my stream videos and the training I've done, put that in there. And,
I usually wince when something like this ends up in an IT site, but okay.
For now, it's a small company, so.
Is this the successor to Infopedia or?
Which never happened?
Yeah, whatever happened to Infopedia?
Infopedia was supposed to be a knowledge management, sort of like a knowledge management site solution. I think it was a different beast, but it never really got defined well enough to say whether it's this or not. I mean, the intention of this is for Microsoft to be able to provide training from a CDN into any tenant. And you're sort of subscribing to that content and then augmenting it with whatever you want to push out on your own. So it's I don't think they're connected, but.
So is Infopedia dead then?
I don't think it ever really was. It wasn't a viable. It never made it to gestation.
Okay.
It was
activate this and ask for a ton of admin privileges. Do you know what's going on in the back end?
It doesn't. It's not as scary as it seems. But for the remote provisioning to be allowed to create a modern site, it has to have the ability. It's the same stuff you would need through the UI. So generally, the person who's doing it ought to be, either a global admin or a SharePoint admin, because they need the permissions to grant the permissions to that application to do that stuff.
if you read it, it's not as scary as it seems. There's a lot of it.
So you can be SharePoint admin?
I think so. I could be wrong. It says it on the prerequisites, but I think it's SharePoint admin. Yeah. I love those, you know. Are you sure you want to grant all these permission things? End users, what do they do? Sure, why not? Well, we put all those words there for you. Like end user license agreements. Yeah. We all read that. So that's really cool. I would check that out. Dev roadmap. So let's see, a couple things there that are sort of important. They're going to definitely be revving SharePoint framework faster as opposed to doing bigger drops. You know, sort of more incremental improvements as opposed to. I mean, there will be larger functionality added, and I think you'll probably. I personally believe that the SharePoint framework is going to become, you know, maybe not the Microsoft framework, but something that crosses a lot more services than what it does today. So that faster iteration is going to help get it there, I think. Teams integration improvements are just making that work better. More library components. So, you know, Microsoft uses SharePoint framework to build their first-party web parts, and some of the stuff that they use ought to be available to us. So they're going to continue to make that more and more available. Open sourcing the Yoma generator, which seems to get a lot of people excited. There are a lot of developers.
Why is it a skunk in the bottom right-hand corner?
This is what the hell is his name? He's a hedgehog.
Yeah, right.
I forget his name.
Sonic?
We're supposed to know. Anyway. Yeah, all these teams at Microsoft now are getting, they're coming up with these little mascots, and some of them are better than others. All right, I'm going to go really fast if anyone wants me to stop. Provisioning. Parker, that's right, Parker the hedgehog. Porcupine. Oh, he's a porcupine. Thank you.
What can identify what it is?
Where I grew up, he's a hedgehog. SharePoint Admin Center is definitely getting better. Has anyone noticed that all the classic features now are on a modern page, and then you click on them and you go to a classic page that doesn't have any Chrome, so you can't get back to where you were? That's pretty cool, huh? But it's getting better. Site rename.
Yay.
So that's even cooler than it sounds because it's URL change, right? You know that URL that you created 10 years ago and you never really liked anyway? You can fix it. And it's going to fix up all the links inside the tenant magically. The one thing you got to watch out for there, and it's going to bite a lot of people because they think it's going to solve it, is if you have links inside Office documents that are pointing at that site, they will no longer work. It's not going to reach inside content. It's going to fix.
I thought that it caught the link and rewrote it.
It's supposed to. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, I mean that's the goal. But then I mean, if you think about the life cycle of that, how long should that work? What if you want to reuse that hyperlink that you know? So yes.
It would just say site exists.
I mean I think it's awesome, and then I think it's gonna. I think it's one of those things where you should definitely think before you use it. It shouldn't be, oh, let's rename all our URLs because we can. But it's supposed to work really well.
Every time I've run into a situation where somebody wanted to rename a site, it's because they wanted that URL to be freed up for a different
for something else, yeah.
So those redirects would be very problematic.
Land grabs, right? OneDrive. Okay. I'm going to really go fast. These slides are publicly available. I'll give them to you guys, but you know, there are no secrets here. This is what they showed at the conference. So there's the Microsoft Search slide. You know, when you think about SharePoint Search, it's just I think of it as becoming Microsoft Search, though it's bigger than that. But if you think about some of the stuff that was so integral to SharePoint and became integral to Office 365, it's all just sort of becoming
like it's going up into the umbrella that goes across all the services. And search is definitely one of those pieces. I know I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm looking at you because I'm, you know.
Yeah, we're thinking of Microsoft Search as replacing every existing search will become Microsoft Search.
Yeah.
And will be available for Microsoft
Yeah.
Search. And then you'll get kind of targeted app experiences.
Yeah.
So when you're in Word, it'll be relevant to what you're doing in Word. When you're in Outlook, you'll be using Microsoft Search, but it will be looking for your email as opposed to looking for your files.
Right. It's sort of like what happened with the sharing dialogue, where it was different everywhere, and then it started to look the same everywhere, and now it really acts the same everywhere.
Yeah.
And Microsoft Search is going to be everywhere, but behave in the right context.
Yeah, very much
right.
So. Those are both part of coherence efforts. So that chapters, for the share, for example, we had quite a few different sharing experiences, and then we all unified them to that one web experience.
Yeah. I think even the search box at the bottom of Windows 10 is going to become Microsoft Search, right? Yeah. Yeah. And I think that gets a lot of big organization content gurus excited because they can start to push things like promoted links, the old term promoted links, you know, that stuff into all of those channels throughout the platform. Developers and partners, Stream, anybody use Stream?
Modern overlay calendar, because that would be really nice.
The group calendar.
Only if you're using Office 365 groups, if I'm in a communication site, that doesn't work.
That's exactly what I said to Vesa when they said they weren't going to do some of this stuff.
I have a little news on that calendar, because there was a whole discussion of one of my workshops. They said it's not on the roadmap, it's not even on the horizon as a priority, and they're not investing in any modernized calendar.
Right.
Because Exchange is the calendar, they do the best.
Yeah, but they could at least build a web card to display an Exchange calendar.
You can expose a group calendar in a web part on a page, and it does work. I mean, it works fine. The problem is does it support the use cases you want? Like we have a team meeting every Friday. Yeah, that's sort of there, but it doesn't. It gets more complicated when you get into specific use cases.
That's what they asked for. They wanted to understand the use cases. There was a product person, his name is John, I forget his last name. He was talking about
Not sure.
the calendars.
Yeah. Calendaring is always a problem. Everybody wants the thing that they're used to, but the thing that they're used to may or may not make sense in a grander scheme.
Yeah. People are very visual, and calendars, which is a visual thing, has never been very visual.
Nobody knows somebody who made a calendar and some other app?
Sorry?
Nobody knows somebody who made a calendar and some other app? I've heard of decent Outlook.
There is actually, I saw somebody was writing a SharePoint framework web part to be like the full calendar on top of the events list. So there's always that option. Open source is solving a lot of the things that Microsoft thinks may not be important, but then they end up being in the product because they're so important. Like those modern search web parts, I won't be surprised if Michael Svensson just went to work at Microsoft and he worked on those. So Microsoft Kazala, everyone uses this, right? Has anyone downloaded it to their phone? I have it too. I don't know. I opened it and there was nobody there.
Where does that fit in with Teams and Yammer? And why is there another one? Is it a WhatsApp?
These are really good questions. I didn't go to that session. I think it's their antidote to WhatsApp. But why? That's that. There, you said be done by right now. It's 8 o'clock. Boom, done. Was that helpful? I don't know what you were expecting, but that's what you got.
We'll take it.
All right. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the upcoming events that we have here in the Boston area. So first and foremost, coming up at the end of July, there's a free SharePoint Saturday event. It's essentially a mini conference. There's about 5 or 6 parallel tracks. You choose your own path. Each session is about 70 to 80 minutes. A lot of great content. A lot of speakers that speak at the SharePoint conference will come and speak at SharePoint Saturday in New York City. Check it out before the free tickets sell out. SP TechCon is coming back to Boston this August, and we're actually going to be hosting our August session at the SP TechCon venue. And as part of our ongoing partnership, they are offering 2 discount codes for Boston Office 365 user group members. The first is a promo code to get you $200 off the overall full conference pass. And the second one is to be able to subscribe just for a day pass on that first Monday, where you'll be able to attend all the sessions, go to the networking reception, including the vendor areas that evening, and then the same night we're going to have our user group there. If you want to come just to the user group, we will be offering a free registration just for that event, but you won't have access to the stuff earlier in the day.
By the way, I'm going to be there on Sunday. We're doing the kitchen thing again. Did anyone go to the kitchen last time? Yeah, I thought you guys. That was pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an all-day thing with people like me but smarter, and we work through real business problems, try to come up with interesting solutions. We present them to each other, so it's almost like a boot campy kind of thing. It's not painful though. I think it's worth doing.
So SharePoint Saturday New England is also coming up this fall. And keep an eye out. Same kind of idea as SharePoint Saturday. It's a free event. Definitely check it out. If you are interested in speaking, Call for Speakers is open to SharePoint Saturday New England. It ends at the end of this month, so certainly check that out. And then, of course, we have Ignite coming up in November down in sunny Florida. For those of you that are interested in going, get your tickets before they sell out. They do sell out just about every year. Now is still a good time to get on that.
Giving away free tickets for that?
We are not. If you are interested in other related technologies, there's quite a few here in the Boston area, everything from Azure to Link, Teams, Skype for Business, Power BI, PowerShell, and so forth. Check it out if you're in the area. Next month, we are still figuring out exactly who's speaking on what topic, but it's going to be awesome. We're also going to host it up in Burlington next month, just to switch it up a little bit. All right, so I know we're kind of short on time, but just real quick, does anyone have any problems or have any tips that they've encountered since last time in the back?
I haven't Googled this yet. Is it possible for private team sites to remove the request to join that site option? I have a secure site, people getting links to it, they're requesting it, but we don't want them in there, we want to stop people from even requesting.
95% sure the answer is yes. Yeah. Go to a classic site, navigate there, copy the URL, paste that URL extension into your modern site. You'll be taken into a security window where you could actually disable requests.
You can create one by going into the classic SharePoint admin center.
Oh, nice.
Anyone else have any problems or have any tips?
So interesting with templates in document libraries. They disappeared around the middle of February. The ability to add them to a content type disappeared from the template, and you could add them manually, and then that disappeared. And all of a sudden they showed up on the little navigation where you can choose Word, Excel, whatever. So that's really nice. You click plus, and you can add a template. They can have multiple templates. Problem I'm finding though is one, you can't do version control on your template. If your template changes, you got to delete it, put a new one, and there's no place to store that in a document library to do version control on it. Where you can do a quick, easy update to it and have it just automatically change. Two, whenever I go to click on that template to create a new document, it saves it as a presentation 1 or whatever the content type name is. And then I got to save it as I get 2 copies of it basically in the document.
Change the name in the bar at the top of the screen. When you open it up, it'll be document 1 or whatever.
Right.
If you change the name up there, it actually renames the file as opposed to saving a second copy.
Okay, thank you.
But you're right about the versioning. That's really meant to be sort of Like I think of that as a content type light,
It is.
really, really light.
Yeah.
But it's better than, it's a simple enough thing that some people are using it and getting some success with it.
When you look at the content type in the library settings, you can see that it's now associated with the content type, as if you just manually just forced it into the content type rather than pointing it to a library. It'd be nice to be able to have that version.
So what happens if you build documents off of a template and then you have to change the template, you delete the one that was associated with them, you upload a new one, and because somebody else decided to make a different name on it, it's not going to reassociate with the documents that were originally set. So
well, templates never do.
Templates never do.
It's a copy.
they used to.
No.
You used to be able to link to a template, a central template.
Right, you can link to a central template, and then do the version control. You would change that template, and that content type would read off that, and you have that. Now you no longer have that reusability. You have to literally go to that library and say, make this the template. Go to this library, make this the template. Go to this library, make this the template. You can't. The content type doesn't seem to be.
You can still centrally manage the templates and put a link in the content type, but that thing within a particular document library is intended to be a local solution.
It doesn't work.
It should.
It wasn't working. It stopped working on the second week of February. So I went to show somebody, it worked, and 2 days later, it stopped working. And that was right in time as I was starting to plan to do my legal drafts library and do the different templates for the legal documents.
Did you report that one?
Nope.
That sounds like a bug.
No, I just remove them now. I just go, all right, what I seem to happen is something disappears for a while, and then it comes back about 2 to 3 months later as the new thing.
You could shorten that 2 or 3 months by letting people know.
No roadmap, there's no warning of it, and
Yeah.
Question in the back.
Forms. I have forms, if you create an Excel document first, and then you formatify it or whatever, there's no ability to do that if you create the Excel document in a communication site. It seems to only work in Teams site. Is there a feature, site collection feature, something somewhere that can be toggled on to change this behavior?
Good question.
Not that I've seen. I would use a flow to push the data from your form into your other data source.
All right, we have time for one more question. Yes.
So is there a way to actually import planner schedules to Outlook? As I do export like an iCalendar, but it only gets the title field and the due dates. I want to grab like including like description of the tasks. Is there a way to get that?
Maybe with Flow, you might be able to string something together. I'm not sure.
I know they recently connected Planner and Outlook tasks to Microsoft To Do, just because you didn't have enough other things to use. But that's probably not what you're trying to do.
What I'm looking for. So, is there a YAML group for Office 365, just like Azure has Azure Advisors?
There used to be. Well, I mean.
I'm surprised that Microsoft has Office 365 group on YAML. And Azure team has like a very wide usage of YAML than Office 365.
There used to be a few very popular communities on Yammer. In fact, there was one in the Boston area that Chris Borlick used to co-run. I haven't looked at it in some time, but last time I did look, it didn't have a lot of activity. I'm not sure. I think the tech communities that Microsoft now has is kind of a place that they're centralizing a lot of the blog posts and the forums. That might be a good place to start.
And one last tidbit item that I found with Power Apps is I'm trying to show different users, different fields, so that based on the user credentials, they see some of the forms have like display mode being like edit and view. So I kind of use like a VLOOKUP or SharePoint list to do that. I don't know if there's an alternate way to do it in a much better way.
So you're looking for like field level permissioning? So SharePoint doesn't support that from a pure security trimming perspective, but like what you're doing with Power Apps, apply your own logic to show or hide.
So I'm using the logic as a lookup field from a different SharePoint list.
That's a fine way to do it. If you add it into a SharePoint group, you can also call the method to get the group membership. So that's another way if you didn't want them. Okay, is anyone looking for work or hiring?